Okay, so the next chapter is 11.4, sexual reproduction. Here you will learn more of the details of fertilization, implantation, then giving birth. And here is your concept map that we use in class today. The whole process, these are color-coded, by the way. So the blue ones, the first stage, obviously, to reproduce, you have to start with sperms and eggs first. So it's formation of sperm, it's called spermatogenesis. Formation of egg is called oogenesis. Okay, now you have your sperm. Now you have your secondary oocyte. I'll explain more about this later. Why shouldn't we call it an egg? So they will unite. The process is called fertilization. And there's two types of fertilization. Either the sperm and egg meet outside of the body, it's called external fertilization, or the egg and sperm meet inside the body, it's called internal fertilization. So the steps in internal fertilization are acrosome reaction, penetration of the membrane, and cortical reaction. Now, once the sperm have fertilized the egg, it needs to implant itself. So implantation, it needs to implant itself in the uterus. So you have your implantation of your blastocyst, and then after 8 weeks, we call it now a fetus. It has a placenta, and after 9 months, the mom is ready to give birth. So it's called parturition, which involves both positive and negative feedback before the baby can come out. All right, so let's start with spermatogenesis and oogenesis. So for spermatogenesis, you have cells in the testis. We call the spermatogonia, which will develop into primary spermatocyte, which will become your spermatids, and then your finished product called the spermatozoa or sperm. So first, let's take a look at a cross section of the testis. Okay, so this is the testis, and it's made up of, kind of looks like your loop of Henle. So we have those tubes. We call these wrinkly tubes your seminiferous tubules. So if we cut it right here, okay, cut it right here, and look at it from the top. So this is now your tubule. It's a tube. Please remember from outside to inside. So your germinal epithelium. So these cells right here are your spermatogonia. Okay, they will undergo mitosis to become your primary spermatocyte. So second layer, your primary spermatocyte. Your primary spermatocyte will undergo the first stage of meiosis to become your secondary spermatocyte. Your secondary spermatocyte will undergo the second stage of meiosis to become your spermatid. The spermatid will keep developing and will form a tail called a spermatozoa. So inside of the tube, the innermost part of the tube, that's where all your sperms are. And all of these sperms inside the tube will all be pushed out of the testis. They will be stored here in the epididymis. Okay. Outside to inside, remember, spermatogonia, primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, spermatids, and spermatozoa. Okay, let's look at the cross-section of your ovary. So for females, this is your ovary. You also have, imagine at the beginning, these are all like small dots, like follicles. So you have here, it will start as your oogonia, then it will become your, these are all oogonia, it will become your primary oocyte, and it will undergo meiosis to ovulate a secondary oocyte. Okay, so this is a little bit confusing, but let's try to understand. There are follicles here inside the ovary. So follicles are small cells. So they will all undergo mitosis. But as you can see, as they keep undergoing mitosis, some cells are small. As you can see there, those follicle cells. But one of the follicle cells will become much larger. So that's an equal rate of mitosis. They're going to keep undergoing mitosis. You have more and more and more cells surrounding that one larger cell. So this one right here, we call this a primary follicle. All of these smaller follicular cells that underwent mitosis, and the much larger cell here, by this time we call this a primary oocyte. This one, at puberty, this will continue to undergo meiosis and they will keep dividing. The rest of the cells are still smaller, but that one cell is your, it will divide unequally to become your secondary oocyte. So you ovulate that secondary oocyte. Okay, now let's compare the two side by side. Okay, some differences you need to discuss here. Number one, the number of cells. Spermatogenesis, one process from one cell, you have 4 haploid cells. For oogenesis, you only have 1 secondary oocyte. These polar bodies right here and right here, this will disintegrate. They provide nourishment to that one larger secondary oocyte. So that's one difference. Second, spermatogenesis begins during puberty. Males, the testes contains spermatogonium, and at puberty, this will happen. For females, the oogenesis starts when you are still an embryo, and it stops up to here, primary oocyte. So females, you are born with primary oocyte. At puberty, you continue your meiosis to ovulate a secondary oocyte. So for males, they're born with spermatogonium. This happens, spermatogenesis happens during puberty. Females, this happens during you're still an embryo, you're born with a primary oocyte. And at puberty, that primary oocyte will finish meiosis to ovulate a secondary oocyte. Okay. Also, please remember, those spermatogonium and oogonium in the ovaries and testes, of course, at the beginning there has to be many of them, so they will all undergo mitosis. And then at puberty, the cells will start meiosis. So the product of stage 1 of meiosis is a secondary oocyte. So remember, stage 1 produces secondary, whether it's secondary spermatocyte or secondary oocyte. It's after stage 1 of meiosis. After stage 2 of meiosis, for males, they produce spermatids. For females, you ovulate a secondary, this secondary oocyte after stage 2 of meiosis continues to divide into 2. You have these 1 large egg and 2 extra polar bodies. Now, the sperm, when it unites with the egg, that's the only time we call it an egg. So at this stage, we call it the secondary oocyte right here. Upon fertilization, stage 2 of meiosis will continue to form an egg. So females, during ovulation, during menstruation, you produce secondary oocyte. Okay, it stays as a secondary oocyte. If there's a sperm in your uterus and your fallopian tube, then the sperm will fertilize the egg, and stage 2 of meiosis will now be complete. The final product will be a fertilized egg or an ovum. So you have now a sperm, you have now a secondary oocyte. If this unites with the secondary oocyte, remember I said it's an egg. Now the process is called fertilization. Either the sperm is outside or the egg is outside. That's called external fertilization for fish. So your female fish will spawn, will release eggs, and the male will be close by to release their sperm, and then the sperm and egg will unite in the water to for them to reproduce. If it's internal, the sperm needs to be inside of the female's body. So we have to know these steps: acrosome reaction, penetration of the egg membrane, and cortical reaction. Okay, I apologize. I forgot to mention for males. So this is your seminiferous tubules. These are your growing cells. This is your sperms here inside. Outside of the seminiferous tubules, right here in the space, in the interstices or space, you have your cells called the Leydig cells, and they are cells that produce testosterone. Another type of cell you need to know are your Sertoli cells. So they're found in between your growing cells, and they nurse those growing cells inside the seminiferous tubules. Don't forget Leydig and Sertoli cell. Number 1, you have acrosome reaction. So the sperm head contains an acrosome. Those are enzymes in the head of the sperm. And your egg has an outer layer called the zona pellucida, this layer right here. So in acrosome reaction, the acrosome enzyme will start to digest the zona pellucida. Zona pellucida is a layer of glycoprotein. So it will digest, as you can see here, it's digesting the coat. Now that it has digested the zone, the membrane, number 2, the membrane of the sperm will unite with the membrane of the egg. This is the actual plasma membrane right here. So the union of the membrane of the sperm with the membrane of the egg triggers the 3rd step, which is your cortical reaction. So you have vesicles inside the egg cell that contains cortical granules. So if this is activated, these vesicles will release the cortical granules here. So you can see here in this space. And these cortical granules will digest these proteins, the small dots. Those are receptor proteins that the sperm uses to dock into the egg. So once it digests these proteins, other sperms will not be able to attach and dock into the egg. It will harden this membrane of the egg. So this whole process prevents polyspermy. So only one sperm can fertilize the egg. Again, acrosome reaction, digestion of the zona pellucida. Second, fusion, penetration of the membrane, right there, fusion of the 2 membranes, the membrane of the sperm, the membrane of the egg, which triggers number 3, cortical reaction, release of cortical granules to digest these proteins so that no further sperm can penetrate the egg, thus preventing polyspermy. Okay, so the next step, we have fertilization now, internal fertilization. That ovum, or what we call a zygote now, needs to implant itself in the walls of the uterus. So how will this happen? Okay, so as you can see in the picture, you have your secondary oocyte after ovulation. By the way, these are called fimbriae. Those are finger-like projections of the oviduct or the fallopian tube that sweeps the egg from the ovaries into the fallopian tube. So you have your secondary oocyte here. And then when it meets the sperm, so you have fertilization, what we just talked about. And then this will now undergo mitosis. So a series of mitosis. As you can see, you have a 2-cell here, 4-cell, 8-cell. It will keep dividing. And then as it moves, as it rolls down your fallopian tube and into the uterus, about after 8 to 9 days, it will start to implant itself. So if you're looking here, let's zoom that in. So if we're looking at implantation right here, okay, the cells of this growing embryo will extend itself into the walls of the endometrium. So it will implant itself, it will attach itself into the walls of the uterus. So that's implantation of the blastocyst. We call this a blastocyst, this wall of cells. So going back to our concept map, about that time when the blastocyst has implanted itself in the uterus, it's going to start to secrete HCG hormone, which triggers the corpus luteum in your ovaries to continue releasing progesterone and estrogen. Okay, allow me to use the one from the reporters, the picture from the reporters. So originally the ovaries, you have corpus luteum. It secretes progesterone and estrogen to thicken the walls of the endometrium here. Now, after the embryo has implanted itself in the walls, it will secrete HCG to keep the corpus luteum here, to keep the corpus luteum alive, to prevent it from disintegrating, so that it can continue to produce progesterone and estrogen. So it's a cycle. Progesterone and estrogen thickens This produces HCG, so the corpus luteum can keep producing progesterone and estrogen.